Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the final one of our Strategic Farm Summer workshops. It's been a real pleasure to do the Strategic Farm Summer in a slightly different way this year. We've had a series of webinars and workshops through the month of June, trying to bring to life some of the work that's happening on our strategic farms across the country. And this morning's session is looking at the good, the bad and the ugly, identifying marginal land across the farm in an advanced way for this one, thinking about taking the yield maps, the software, the information that you're using and taking that to the next level. So just before we start, if you can all pop yourselves on mute, that would be brilliant. And if you're happy to turn your videos off while we're in the main session and kind of the main discussions and the presentations are happening, that would be great. But it'd be great if you're happy to turn them on when we get to the discussion sessions and to see you all there. We're using Teams this morning, so hopefully most of you have used Teams before. If you haven't, you should have the kind of toolbar here that you can see, and there's a little icon here, the speech bubble, that you can use to chat, and we'll be using that a bit as we go through today. And feel free to pop anything in there, ask any questions as we go through. We're scheduled to be here till 12:30 today, and we've got quite a lot to cover and get through, but plenty of time for questions and discussion as well. The session is being recorded and it will be available online next week through our YouTube channels and through our websites. And if you wanted to stay in touch with what's going on or get in touch with any of the speakers today, that's their Twitter handles there. This session has got basis and ROSO points attached to it, and if you'd like to claim basis and ROSO points, please could you just send an email to ke.events@ahdb.org.uk and add in your name, your account number and your postcode for basis, and the same for ROSO, but if you can pop your date of birth in as well, they ask for that. We don't look at it too closely. So the format of today, we're going to split it into a few different sections. So I'm shortly going to hand over to Brian, and he's going to talk through his marginal land journey so far, what they've kind of done on the farm, what they've looked at and what they've seen. We're then going to kind of open that for discussion and hear what your journeys have been so far and what data you're using on farm. David Clark, so I should say Brian Barker's our Strategic Farm East host. I don't think I need to introduce you anymore, Brian. I think you're known, but our fantastic host at the farm in the East in Suffolk. And then David Clark from NIAB is leading on the package of work, part of his PhD and work he's doing with NIAB, and being fundamental in pulling together the data on this topic. So David's going to talk us through how he's then started to calculate and look at marginal land but on a field scale, and then we can discuss that as a group, and then we'll move across to thinking about marginal land across the landscape. We'll then have time for questions and discussion, and like I say, finish at 12:30. Also today on the call, we've got our steering group members, Tom Dewars, David Lord, and AHDB colleagues that work with us across the Strategic Farm Network. So just to kind of put this into context, there's a range of work happening on all of our strategic farms across the country and on Brian's farm in the East. And we're looking at kind of reducing inputs but keeping the yield and keeping productivity, using varieties and fungicide resistance, managing the use of cover crops and benefits to water quality and what that looks like, using the natural environment and the landscape and looking at pests and beneficials. And then this package of work we've picked up with a view kind of going forwards to environmental policy going in the future, and how we can balance marginal land and being productive in the productive areas and the unproductive areas, making the most of those across the farm landscape as well. So I'm going to hand over to Brian, our host for the farm, and he's going to talk you through where we've got to, a bit of background and thinking of where we are today. So over to you, Brian.
Brilliant. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you, everyone, for sort of logging in. This is obviously the advanced session. We've had a session this morning which has sort of brought quite a lot of interesting ideas and thoughts. So I'll try and integrate as many of those points into this discussion so we can sort of bringing the two together. So what we sort of look at is this topic which isn't a very well, it's an interesting topic, but it's not a very easy one to say that there's any right way or wrong way of doing it. So if we move on to the next slide, it's a very personal topic, and we always have very big discussions between employees, between my farm partners, to what we actually class as marginal land. It's very much like what we always say is the term, which I hate, which is min-till. Well, one man's min-till is completely different to the next door neighbours. You can rip it up to 6 to 8 inches and say you're min-tilling it, or just using a stubble rake to 6 to 8 millimetres is another person's min-till. So again, it's very personal and very emotional about how you actually class it. And the whole idea of what we were trying to sort of talk about is how we view our farmland. And we know that most farms, if you're completely honest with yourselves, there are parts of the farm that you pretty much shouldn't be cropping, but we still crop it for the reason that that's the way we've always done it, or we don't know what else to do with it and what the costs are and how to look at it. And as farming gets more sort of advanced technology, we're going to be more and more data driven to make much more educated decisions. And so this is what we've been doing with this piece of work, to try and make sure that we're evaluating our performance of the farm, not just physically with yield, but also financially with net margins across fields, across the landscape, but also with being mindful of where the industry is actually going, with the 25-year environment plan, with the agricultural bill, with ELMS, with carbon, with private money from the private sectors coming into agriculture to put trees for carbon storage, all this sort of stuff. That our industry is changing to a different way. We've got to look at ourselves slightly differently. We on EJ Barker and Sons, we've had high level stewardship, and we're in 3rd year of higher tier. So we've been doing sort of marginal land right from sort of 2008, I think, when we started. And so we've sort of taken 6% of our farm out with high level stewardship and put into grass margins, buffering watercourses, and then looking at different habitats, how we could link it all together, buffering our hedgerows. And then with higher tier, we've then taken another 6% out to benefit the key species that we were looking at in the historical landscape, and identified another stream of areas of farm land that wasn't performing to what we wanted. But our business is all about, and what EJ Barker and Sons wanted to do was trying to get the most out of our natural habitats, our natural landscape. We wanted to farm environmentally, but also produce the best crops that we possibly can. So we're looking at farming the best possible way, with technology, with the best fertilizers, with the best agronomics. But then the bits around the edge, which sometimes make a profit, sometimes don't, we're looking at what benefits they can give to the farming system and the local landscape. So we're looking at the integrated pest management. So flowering margins, another one of the topics here with a strategic farm, is looking at the beneficial insects. Can we get more from natural enemies to take away pests? We haven't been using insecticides on this farm for a few years now, and we're trying to build up our natural insects. I've always said, well, I've said lately that the best way to kill an insect at the moment is with another insect. So we've really got to look after them, give them the habitats, and how we locate them. And obviously with income coming from higher tier, some of these options need to be put on productive lands to get the best out of them. So it's a very fine margin about where we see marginal being for economics, but also environmentally, but also financially. So this is where this sort of system of works is coming from. And so when we sort of look at it, there's quite a nice merger of, if we go to the next slide, of all the different things that we're looking at, environmentally, food production, and possible alternative streams of income. Looking at integrating livestock onto your farm, it might be a great way that you could actually put some of the different parts of your farm to another enterprise. So if you're looking to bring sheep or cattle, could you put down grass on your poorer performing parts? So there's some real big sort of topics bubbling under the surface that this becomes quite relevant with being marginal land, and everything that we know going forward. Farming environmentally is going to be much more of the the mainstream, and so we've got to really pick and choose the best places to put different environmental features. So historically, if we move on to the next slide, we sort of been doing the general record keeping that we've all, probably most of us have got a notebook somewhere in their office on the shelf in every field, and you're just scribbling down good bits and bad bits, asking opinions of past generations. My dad had a whole stream of notebooks which are still in my desk, and not as legible as my handwriting, but my handwriting's pretty bad as well. But it's passing that knowledge from year to year, and then you sort of keep records of the good bits and the bad bits, where ditches need to be cleaned out, if the bits need to be mold drained, or shading or rabbit damage. There's lots of things that sort of can be highlighted, and this information I still do year on year, because some things you can't do with data. Some of it is actually emotive and emotionally driven, about what you see as the good bits and the bad bits. Then with the technology that's come in to more mainstream, which I'm sure most of you are sort of using and looking to use, is yield mapping. Very easily done, but you can create some areas of sort of dirty data, which David will sort of talk about. I used yield maps. I used to sort of rank them in a traffic light system or a simple color scheme. The bits that were definitely making a loss, the bits were making a little bit of a profit, and then the real good bits that were making a very good, so the green, the amber, and the red. But that's only one season snapshot, and obviously your yield fluctuates, and your net margins and your gross margins become profitable at different levels depending on price volatility. And so this is a whole another element of how can you draw from year to year, not just being blinkered onto one field, but how can you then release it over the whole landscape, which is key. And so then we're sort of looking at using the technology available to us. So if we move on to the next slide, we've obviously got different things that we can sort of layer up underneath the surface to give us more educated interpretation of this data. So we're looking at all EC scans, soil tests, that can be layered up. We use Omnia, which is my platform of choice, just for layering up all this information. You can draw blackgrass maps year on year. You can do establishment, good bits and bad bits. I've got the 1945 maps in there. I've got my drainage maps. Now you're getting free NDVI scans from different platforms. Omnia are offering it at the moment. And then you also can go historically, go back and forth. So there's lots of data that can be brought in. And then when you're doing field walking, you can then inspection, layer it up with the different things that you see, and you start creating a filing cabinet of information for each field, which you can then draw upon in future years and make much better decisions. And one thing that came up in the first session was someone said, well, could you just got this from your dad's notebooks? Do you need to have all this technology? But on the flip side of it, sometimes the years merge into two, or things change, or a farm manager leaves and all his knowledge, or a farm employee leaves, and all that information in his head is then lost. And so this is a great way of making sure that you've got longevity of your data going forward in case of a problem. We've got insurance for if I was taken out of this business, would someone be able to take it on in the same light? And that's where I'm using Omnia in this data to make sure, give me a safety blanket that I can communicate what I'm thinking and what I'm seeing on the ground to other people, and using it with the agronomists, soil scientists that come on the farm. We've got a much more educated sort of system to deliver and discuss what we're talking about. And then we're layering up with the financial side. So with using benchmark crop bench figures, we can then identify which ones are really pushing out the high margins, net margins in this table, but you can look at gross margins, and you can take the fixed costs out. That was another interesting one from the discussion earlier. At what point do you add in or take away your fixed costs? Should you be looking at it? Because obviously if you're taking land out of production, you can obviously then skew your investment in machinery too far. And so at what point does it become important to restructure your fixed costs? Do you need such a big combine? Do you need such a big sprayer? Is it more cost effective to get a neighbour in to do some drilling and have a much smaller drilling rig with more flexibility? So that's another subplot that comes in. We also had a discussion about auto shutoff. Do you need to invest in auto shutoff if you're and what the impact on your marginal land that has? When we started in higher level stewardship, we didn't have auto shutoff, and so we went with very much of a straight line farming, multiples of your tram lines, and trying to eliminate a triangle, so we didn't have overdosing or underdosing. But now with auto shutoff, that marginal land becomes, the triangles become a bit more cost effective to farm, and so there's a different debate about what infrastructure you invest in. But again, it comes down to the bottom, and I'm sure most of the arable business groups sort of know that fixed costs in UK farming is something that we need to sort of harness and understand, and be a bit more understanding of going forward on what scale. So yeah, there's lots of things that come into it, and this, hopefully this advanced session is going to be more of a discussion about what people are doing, how people view it. I know that in the east we've obviously got some decent yields, which in other parts of the country they may say, well, that's your worst bit is our best bits, and that changes again the marginal viewpoint. So it's very emotional and personal, and I have on constant debates with our employees and other farmers about why should we be taking that? We've taken some really good land out of production, but then it's knowing that my sort of and the farm's direction of travel is making sure that we're integrating the environmental side of it with the best cropping possible, trying to lower our inputs, trying to build our integrated pest management to benefit the farm over the whole, knowing that we have to take some land out of production, and if it's good land, then hopefully the options that we're putting in there will benefit. Some options can go on the real rough land, but you've got to know what your investment is and what you're trying to get out of these options, and what else you can do with marginal land. So it's a real emotional and personal debate when you get to it. So once you've decided what your marginal land is, you can then work out, do you need to invest in it to make it better? Can you just pay for a bit of drainage? Is it old drainage systems, organic matter? Is there something else that you can do? Are there any other enterprises that you're interested in that will give you long-term security? How can you lower your risk, get an annual fee from the worst bits, which means you can concentrate all your time and effort onto your best bits and getting the most out of those bits? Does that extra bit then take away from your best bits? So again, it's a very fine balance, and it's a really interesting story that people have different viewpoints, and hopefully they'll come across today. And some of these stewardship scheme options do give sensible returns. When you go to the next table, they'll be showing these are the options that we use and our rough net costing on them. First years are normally quite not best return, because you're investing in the seed and getting everything in the wee bird and down for year one. But then in year 2 to 5, your pollinector mixes, your floral grasses, they have a better return. And then there's other ones which you have to do every year, like the wild seed mixes, which don't have a very good return, but then you can increase their income, because then you can add in the supplementary feeding, which adds another cost in another thing. But then again, it's time and how much you value your time. So it's interesting going forward. ELMS and other availability, it's going to be interesting to see how it goes, but we've got to really understand which bits are our good bits, our bad bits, and our ugly bits that we just shouldn't be farming. But then it's a discussion to have, is where we draw that line of where we start cropping and where we don't. So that's hopefully a good summary of where we actually are at EJ Barker and Sons.
Perfect. Thank you, Brian. That was great, and great to kind of hear your journey so far and your kind of thought processes at the moment. So we've got a great group here this morning, and we wanted to make this session kind of interactive as possible. Given that we're the advanced group, you guys are, we just wondered about kind of where you are on farm at the moment, and what kind of data and information kind of tools you're using at the moment, and then that'll help us as we go through the conversation. So I wonder if you're able to pop on into the chat. I know you put it in when you registered, for a lot of you as well, kind of whether you're using yield mapping, how many years you've used yield mapping for, what kind of software you're using. I don't know if you could pop that into the chat for those of you. I might pick on a couple of you. Tom Dewars, do you want to share what you're doing and what you use at the moment, and whether that's similar to Brian or not?
So picking on me, Teresa. Yes, it is very similar to Brian, really, and we actually, that was one of the main reasons of switching our system from soil to Omnia. Was when we came out of ELS and wanted to go to countryside stewardship. The field performance module in Omnia was streets ahead of anything else. And what we did, there's a facility in there. It takes a bit of work because, but you can combine as many layers of years of yield data on top of each other as you like. But what I first had to do is work out what I thought the net margin was likely to be for all these options, as Brian did there in his table, and then go back into each year and say, right, in 2012, how much yield would I need to achieve more than that that net margin for that countryside stewardship option? And then Omnia uses a traffic light system, so you can have green, set the yield bars to green for any yield that would have yielded more, yellow if it's marginal, and red if it was definitely below. And then obviously different costs for different years. So each year the yield parameters were different, but it just takes a bit of time, go through all that, and then just hit the button. And hey presto, you've got a map of the areas that are consistently, you'd be better off consistently putting them into stewardship. Not always the total answer, because a lot of them are turning headlands, and do you just move your turning headland elsewhere? So that's another discussion. But you know, there's some areas, triangles, bits where round poles and things like that, that just, you know, easy, makes a lot of sense just to say, why are we cropping that? It's losing us money every year.
Thank you, Tom. Excuse my dogs. Tom Home, I just wondered if you could share what you're doing at home as well.
Can you hear me now? Has that got me? Yeah, funnily enough, I'm actually with soil at the moment, and it's interesting that Tom said that he's moved to Omnia, because I do find soil, it's quite a complicated way of sort of doing net margin maps, and probably isn't as usability isn't as good as perhaps some of the other ones. But we've been yield mapping on the farm for probably between 3 to 5 years. But what I've found is, obviously, the weather has the biggest impact on it, doesn't it, really? Because in some years, you almost have to take them with a pinch of salt, yield maps, because there could be so many varying things that affect it as well. So that's really, I'm sort of trying to build up a year, sort of between 5 to 7 years worth of yield maps, and then take it from there, really.
Brilliant. No, that's really good. And kind of, we're going to come on to, Brian, aren't we, and David, what you've done, and having that multiple years worth of information really adds value when you start to do the analysis on farm. Great, thanks for sharing that, Tom. And I'm just going to, yeah, Nick, I wondered if you wanted to share where you are at as well, and then that kind of adds to the discussion.
Hi, Teresa. Yeah. I'm kind of a bit backward on this. We've got field mapping on the combine, but I just haven't been able to download the data. It's just a sort of stupid software issue, and I was kind of thinking, okay, how am I going to push forward on this? I've got lots of marginal land down in river valleys and things, and I just really want to sort of see where I can go on this. But I'm from a data storage or collection point of view, no, I'm back of the race, back of the class on this one. So I'm just listening to others.
Hopefully this will incentivize you to try and get that off, Nick, and okay, you know, and go from there. And no, brilliant. So we've got a kind of a range of people with a range of ideas, and yeah, that will really help us as we go through. Thank you for sharing where you are. So if we move on to David's going to share now what he's done. So using the data from Brian's and taken that forward. So over to you, David, and we'll talk about what you've done on a field scale now, and then a bit later how we could use that on a on more of a landscape scale. So over to you, David.
Thanks, Teresa. Yeah, so firstly, sort of like, you know, Omnia and Gatekeeper, Brian, we're kind of reinventing the wheel slightly, but the methods we're using is trying to give us a bit more flexibility with it. Also really honing down into the data and checking what we're calculating is correct and that we can trust it. But then also by doing it outside some of those platforms, it gives us a bit more flexibility to work with some of the data that Sam is on the call, sort of something like the erosion risk mapping and some of the environmental risk mapping, and identify areas that are potentially not just of marginal land, but where our marginal land coexists with areas that potentially are of high environmental risk. I know Nick just said in the River Valley, some of his marginal lands, those sort of examples where actually we can, you know, put schemes and manage or change management to both improve the farm economically, but also improve the environmental footprint of the farm. And one of the big challenges is just the size of the data sets, and that's where Omnia and Gatekeeper and SOIL have developed these platforms to deal with it. Some things they do well, as we've discussed, some things they don't do quite as well. But for Brian's data set, we've got kind of 2 farmed areas segregated, one in the northeast, one in the southwest, over sort of a couple of kilometers. We've got 10 years of yield data going back from 2011 to 2020, last year. The only crop that really isn't spatially mapped within the rotation is Brian's herbish grass. It goes through the combine, but we'll discuss later why sort of the yield mapping doesn't pick that up very well. You know, I'm based in Norfolk, Morley, and there's a lot of sugar beet around here that's obviously not spatially mapped, and then you get to other areas with potatoes and other veg crops that may not be mapped so well. So you've got to take that into account when looking at the analysis. So it's 36 fields, 338 yield maps over the last 10 years. So this, you know, soon builds up, and as Nick pointed, this can be a bit overwhelming sometimes with the data. So Brian's got over 1.4 million data points. This wouldn't fit in an Excel spreadsheet. Excel maxes out at about 1.4. So we've already got to sort of deal with the software to analyze that. And the challenge has always been to make informed decisions from this data set. How can we use it to identify areas that might need improvement? How can we use it in tramline trials? How can we use it as we're going now to identify marginal land? So that was kind of the remit that Brian and Teresa gave myself, to sort of how can we use this data to identify marginal land outside of the current software packages. Next slide, please. So I will say, if you know, this is all working in progress. It's part of my PhD as well as this marginal land project, and you know, we've still got a few months of the project left. So if there's things that we're missing, or things we should be doing differently, or things I haven't considered, or something that's completely wrong, just shout or question, and we can have a discussion around that. It'd be good to have a discussion as we go. Brian alluded to early on that the first sort of point of call, and other people have mentioned it since then, is do we trust the data? We know yield mapping can be difficult. Some of this comes from sort of ourselves using it. You know, we were all in a rush to get the crop out into the grain, into the shed at harvest. You know, is it calibrated properly? We're always going to have to turn over areas that have already been combined. The yield mapping software can sometimes not identify this very well. So how do we get rid of those points? So we've employed a couple of methods here. This is similar to some of the ones that might be used in your SOIL and Omnia, but probably in a little bit more detail and with a little bit more statistical power. So the first one is just to remove really quick and slow traveling speeds. We've then moved areas that the direction has changed considerably. So this is a lot of the turning points, yields outside 3 standard deviations of the mean, plus or minus this. So these are really, really low yields or really, really high yields that we just assume to be errors, you know, unrealistic. And then we've used a couple of spatial statistics. So local Moran spatial outliers is quite a simple principle to this. It will basically identify, it will calculate whether a point is similar to the points around it. So it will, so that all the points there are blue. It is saying that these points aren't the same as those within a 40-meter radius of around them. Therefore, they're probably not correct. And you can see it's done quite a good job of getting rid of some of those half-cut widths and odd little ponds or whatever it is things. So it just cleans the data set up nicely. There's a second aspect of the data inaccuracies is just generally how well it's measuring yield. And the one thing I will say is a fantastic resource to have when looking at this, you know, using yield maps more than just a cautionary glance, is to have verified yields for each field. So Brian's got weigh cells on his trailers, so therefore he gets a total total yield off the field each year, and we can plot that against what the average yield of the yield map is. And you can see in winter wheat we do a pretty good job of matching that. There's the odd one where it's slightly high or slightly low, and we're actually looking at some statistics now to try and pull that back closer to that line. So again, we're not overestimating or underestimating yield. This isn't such a big issue when we're just looking at patterns in data, but as soon as we start adding financial cost to it, margin, you know, an overestimation of half a ton or 1 ton can quite quickly lead to inaccuracies of sort of £100 plus in our margin calculations. And then you can see there why we've excluded herbage grass from the analysis. It's just all over the place, and that's, you know, down to both the crop itself and then how it's combined at quite high moisture levels. So we've had to exclude that from the analysis, and all farms are going to have that. So it's the sort of thing where if you have those crops, sugar beet, herbage grass, you might want to do your yield map analysis, and then in those years go and ground truth the data. You know, how does the crop look? How does it feel in those areas in that year? And just make a note on a notepad or on your map, so you can say, well, yeah, it looks to be forming the same sort of patterns in those crops. I suppose it'd be a nice point, just, sorry, Teresa, if you go back, just to ask how people have found that, you know, do they trust their yield data? Do they calibrate it with any other sort of data sets? Do they have field level yields or crop level yields, or how do they find SOAL and Omnia for cleaning the data set? I don't know if someone might want to comment on that.
I'll kick off. We know that there are elements when you look at yield maps that when the header's lifting up, lifting out, there's a time when it's sort of still processing, so it does switch off and leave some dirty data set. So it does incentivize the turning the headlands when you're doing your ins and outs. They will look worse than they actually sometimes are, and that's where the Omnia style, just looking at it, may not do it as the headlands justice in certain respects, and so that's where we've certainly seen our headlands do look worse on a yield map. So it's something to bear in mind. And then in the fields, sometimes you get the where you're cutting a half cut or something, and the operator sometimes doesn't narrow his header down, his header width in the terminal, or it has it too wide, or you're trying to get that picture for Twitter saying that you're in a 20-ton crop and you wind it right down and you process too much. That's still going to affect it at some point, but it does get you a chuckle on Twitter during harvest. So there are different things that it's very much Omnia operator is the key to being on the ball to give you the data. But then there are times that, like we had a season where the oilseed rate, we're trying to cut it so high for the stubble because it was a big crop, that it was then bobbing in and out of where it was actually taking recording, and so we had a really dirty in and out patches yield map. So there are things that sort of we've learned from going forward for the years that we've had.
Yeah, I'd echo that. That could be a problem if you don't set the height at which it comes in CBIS. If you change from a low cut to a high cut, then you can easily miss some data there. But we've had yield mapping for 10, 11 seasons now, but this will be the first season where we've actually got GPS on the steering on the combine, and so we've always had issues where, like Brian said, you get left with a strip sometimes, and you forget to cut it down. Lots more short work, but also we've noticed that our operator how he viewed the cutter bar was different going one way than it was the other. If he's looking to the left, he'd take a full cut, and if he was looking to the right, he'd miss a foot. So your yield data wasn't clean. So that we're hoping that we can tidy or get much better yield data with auto steer. Omnia has a button which it says cleans the data on the way in, but what it actually does, I've no idea. I don't know whether you know, Brian, but presumably it's better than it was when it went in. But what it actually takes out, I don't know whether it takes some of that those ins and outs away, because like Brian said, sometimes you've got a 20-second delay before you've got any crop registered on the yield meter as you cut in, and obviously you've then got sort of 10-15 seconds after you've finished cutting where it's still processing. So there's clearly going to be some errors around there, so you have to be careful with what you're looking at, obviously.
Is David, without going through the kind of system that you've done, is there any kind of simple way that, you know, people could clean their data or remove kind of data if they know it's not right?
It's difficult. Like, you know, a lot of this has been done in sort of statistical software. So, you know, on farm, I think it's more sort of just making note of it and recognizing it. You know, in your, you know, there are, you know, Omnia and do have those cleaning buttons, as Tom said, but it's yeah, just keeping aware that those errors are there, and that, you know, just don't take it for read, and just check, you know, if you've got some sort of yield data, even if it's just, you know, run one trailer over the weighbridge from 100 meters or whatever it is down the crop, and then have a look what the yield map's saying, just to double validate that what you're seeing, you know, on screen is what's actually happening. Because as soon as we start doing, you know, try and make real, you know, pinpoint management decisions, we've really got to be able to trust the data. If not, we're just sort of barking up wrong trees and potentially taking areas out that aren't economical. So it's just you know, be aware of it.
Yeah, thank you very much.
It also certainly depends on what brand of combine you have. Unless you've got a brand spanking new class, the new series, I think, as Brian said, if you haven't got trailer weighers, you're looking at a variance, but you're not looking at true yield data, because it's absolutely hopeless. It always you need to calibrate the map afterwards with actual tonnage to get meaningful data. It gives you the variance, fine, but I think the CNH ones, and I'm not sure about the John Deere, but they're a much more accurate weigher in the first place, I think. But certainly the class ones until now have just been based on a magic eye looking at something coming up an elevator, and there's a lot of assumptions going in there with 1,000 grain weights and things like that.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, everybody. Great. Want to keep going, David?
Yeah. So then we run obviously all the yield maps through the cleaning process, and that gives us our cleaned yield maps, and they're really useful. And as Tom said, we can see the patterns, and we can see, i.e. 2019, 2020, the sort of the southeast corner of the field looks to be performing worse. However, without actually attributing figures to that, it's difficult, because although the colours are different, you know, we're probably still 10, 11 tonnes of crop in 2019. You know, it is lower in 2020, as you'd expect from a second week and the season that we had. But it's hard to tell, you know, is that marginal? I would say, you know, 10 tonnes is not going to be marginal. You borderline 2020, but then in other years it doesn't look to be quite so exaggerated. So it's putting them all together over time and trusting the data, and then adding a second bit of complexity to it. I think we'll move on, Teresa. I think dwelling on that too much. So this is just the you know, nothing new here. This is what we've used to calculate the total costs. So Brian, sorry, net margin. So Brian's for each field has his variable cost and his fixed costs for each field, and they can attribute to a total cost. And then we, you know, for each yield point, map point, we can then times that by the grain price of that year, minus the total cost, and this gives us a net margin for that single yield point. And it's gone through the cleaning process and the processing to check it's accurate. So we're reasonably confident in the figure we're getting. However, you know, without putting them across years, it's hard to see what we're going to use it for. Next slide, please, Teresa. So this is one thing we've taken slightly further than some of the platforms do. It is actually looking at the spatial patterns across time. So we can kind of look at, you know, is it inconsistent? Is it consistent in Omnia and other devices? But it's hard to quantify what the variation in those areas is. So one method we've used, the method we've used is something called clustering. So it's a clustering algorithm, and we've used one called the fuzzy k-means, but it's neither here nor there. But I've given a really simple example of what it does. So we've got two yield data sets, one from 2011, one from 2013. And it completely takes the spatial element out of it. It will just plot the yield from 2011 for each point. So that point is a 10 meters squared, for example. So we'll have a yield for 2011 for that 10 meters and a yield for 2013 from that 10 meters, and we'll plot them against each other, and we'll be able to see how the data looks spatially, sort of, when I say spatially, on a graph. And from that, the algorithms, machine learning algorithm, will keep putting points in until it can make clusters that it is confident are very different from each other. So, for example, here it's identified from those 2 years yield data sets, it's identified this yellow cluster, which is a cluster that's low yielding in both years. The red cluster, which appears to be sort of high yielding in 2013, but sort of middle of the road in 2011. And then a cluster that's highlighted here that's blue, that is high yielding in 2011, but very low yielding in 2013. So it's picking patterns in the data set that are consistent across time. So over the 10 or 11 years, when we run the yield data through this, the attributes it comes out will tell us that those points in the field that are the same cluster have the same patterns over time. So in dry years, they perform the same. In wet years, they perform the same. In you know, normal years, or whatever the variable is, that those areas have performed the same. So then we can add the spatial element back onto that. Yeah, sorry, yeah, carry on, Teresa. So we can add the spatial element back onto that and plot them out, and this gives us the, you know, similar to what you'd get in Omnia, but within a bit more scientific rigor to it. We get these clusters that are identified as areas that are performing the same across all years. So we've got, for shrubbery field, it's an example on Brian's farm. We've got a blue cluster down the, you know, cluster 3, which I've highlighted blue here, that's down that left-hand side of the field. We've got a purpley colour on the outside around the turning headlands. We've got a green cluster in the middle, and then there's sort of this pinkish cluster that's dotted over a bit elsewhere. Now, it's probably always easiest to put this through a smoothing. So this is just based on how points differ from their distance away from it, and it makes it a lot easier to interpret, and probably irons out some of those inconsistencies in the data. So we ended up with this data that's identified these areas of the fields that perform exactly the same across time. So we can then use our yield and margin data. Sorry, Teresa, next slide. So we can then use our yield and margin data to plot how these clusters perform across time and across each space. So you can see here, in terms of yield, we've got the green cluster that is every consistently higher than all other clusters throughout the years. Sort of in winter wheat, these are just focusing on the winter wheat years, with the exception of 2011, you know, over 10 tons a hectare every year. And then we've got the 2 middle of the road clusters, the purple and the red, which sort of between 8 and 10 tons. And then we've got this lower yielding blue cluster that can be considerably lower, but obviously in some years, such as 2019 and 2011, jumps up and down a bit. So I think Brian's.
Yeah, can we just go back?
Yeah.
This is where it's slightly different from yield mapping, and this is where your extra detail comes into it. Because when I've done my yield mapping, when you sort of set those parameters as what Tom Dewars explained, what he had done, where you sort of put a level in the sand, you don't know how many points are really just on the top end of that scale, or just over it in the next scale, and how much is the very high bits, which is in dragging everything else up. So this, with these lines, you can start picking out where the clusters actually differ. You can see the purple and the orange clusters, when you look at the graphs, actually mirror very, very closely in some years, but then in 2020 there was quite a big difference. And then you can see that's where we had a wet season last year, and the headlands got pounded down and they didn't perform very well. But in the normal year, they'd look very similar to what's just inside the field. And then obviously you've got your green bit in the middle of the field, which is consistently performing, and then your turquoise, which obviously highlights in the worst year. So this is the difference when you start looking at what Omnia and the spatial kriging that Omnia and Soil and Gatekeeper can do. You don't actually know very well where all the points sit and how close they are together. And I think this is where this next level sort of gives you much more information that you can sort of cut the chaff from the wheat and really understand what's going on. And the example that we've got over leaf, which I'm sure Teresa will turn to soon, which Dave will explain, shows what we've actually done on that field. The map on the left is what we've actually taken out in stewardship, and David can explain what he's calculated from the clustering that he's got.
Yeah, so for example, the 0.5 hectares, the grey area, that was taken out before you started to yield map, wasn't it, Brian? So we haven't got any information from that area.
Yeah, so that's just there's a corner which is sort of very weedy, and it's got a pylon in the middle of it, which you then had to go round. It's now holding our farm's weather station as well, because it hasn't got any hedges near it, so it's quite open plan field example. So that was always taken out before high level stewardship, and then we've added the yellow and orange into higher tier because it was location to the woods and everything else that we were trying to create around the woodland. We wanted some more environmental features, but also knew that the headland shading showing up in the turquoise was consistently poorer. We had lots of deer and hare damage coming out of the wood, and so that's why we've taken out and put it into wild seed mixes and pollen and nectar mix, and then hopefully your figures you've pulled out are fairly close to what we were sort of making elsewhere. Yeah,
so here I've actually sort of kind of ignoring the clusters, I've took a total mean of those 0.9 and 0.5 hectares that Brian actually took out in 2018 and calculated how that performed in those years before that. And it gave us an average margin of £451 a hectare. No, sorry, £463 a hectare. And Brian's currently being paid at £451 a hectare for an environmental scheme. So, in hindsight, we're using this example because it's kind of a retrospective what you would have done beforehand and identified that area. Brian's done it based on his other yield mapping and Omnia, but he's identified that area, and he, although it's pretty close, it's certainly his ease of work and whatever. And there's some discussions here probably to have about fixed costs. Should they be included in the scheme and or then spread across the rest of the hectares that are farmed. But generally, he's that the clustering's identified that area as something that's probably economical to put into a scheme across the rotation.
And when we're doing this, we've done this on our farm field by field basis, and then tried to then identify within fields. Yeah, we could slice that a bit, slice that. Can we straighten that headland off? Does that reduce a triangle? Does that reduce short work? Location to gateways, so you're saving yourself time on an operations basis, and you can very quickly cut off bits, which I'm sure everyone's done, and farm it differently. So that's what we've done for field by field, but it's then where you go landscape scale and how you can get the most out of it, which we'll go on to later. But then the fixed cost is where do you add in, like we've taken nearly 1.4 nearly 2 hectares out of that field. Well, that's then when you've got to start looking at your fixed costs, because obviously you're carrying too many fixed costs if you're not farming it completely, but then you still got to do some operations on it, mowing it, drilling it, seeding it, and fertilizing it. So there's different things that you've got to look at. But do we need to have such a big sprayer? Do we need to have such a big combine? Is the discussions that we know that we probably carry a little bit too many fixed costs, if we're being brutally honest. And that's why we then looked at sort of how we can streamline our fixed costs by doing contracting work outside of our boundary, because we're reducing our actual own farmed area to benefit our long-term sort of want of sort of environmental farming.
Brian, Mike's asked, does that 451 hectares include cost of establishing and managing the AB1? I believe it does, doesn't it?
Yeah, so in the table we've given a assumption of costs. That table was done for a different exercise, but it's sort of what it costs to spray it off, establish it, mow it, and the cost of the seed, cost of any fertilizer and sprays. That's all been taken into account for year one, but then also the years after it, when you do less, it's also been taken into account as well. So it's just a straight going by the prescriptions of the scheme. We've just taken our sort of average farm cost and done it, so we're doing other work for other people for stewardship, and so we sort of wanted to give them an indication of their net return, and so it's a very straightforward budgeting exercise that we've used for this example. So yeah, it's hopefully got as much of the cost in there as possible. few things that we have to do different, like if you need to do any weed wiping or spot spraying, that's an extra cost that would then have to be attributed to do it. But and then if you have a complete failure, then obviously you've got to then re-drill it or do something different or mow it more often. Then obviously it's going to change those net margins. But obviously everyone's costings are slightly different. But we try to be as good, close to budget as possible for our own working system.
Good, thank you. Just as an example, this is the Omnia data set. So Brian, is this, obviously it hasn't got that, that's just calculated after you've taken that area out, isn't it?
Yeah, so Omnia, obviously I changed my field boundary for shrubbery to remove that, because then I've got those other bits listed in Omnia as different field parcels. So this is the field parcel which is now shrubbery, and so it's eliminated the stuff either side of it. But yeah, this is using their field performance for all the winter wheat yield maps that I had in Omnia. So I think I've got 6 years worth in Omnia. I haven't gone to the 10, but I think I've got 6 years. So that probably had about 3 winter wheats in it, and that's given the consistency, inconsistency. And so that's where when you look at it in the histogram, there could be a whole load number of points which are just over or just under, but they've been lumped into the green or the light green, and so you don't get the sort of difference and how close or how high they are compared to what the clustering system does. So that's where a histogram is slightly different to what you're probably doing with your clustering system, isn't it?
Yeah, I think there's by no means this is what people should be using to do this sort of work. I think we're doing it in a slightly different way because we want to take it a bit further, looking at weather patterns and what's influencing it. Because ultimately it's going to the previous slide. You've got those clusters, and Brian's identified one that can be taken out. Now he's still got to probably manage the rest of the field, and that data is then still very useful for management. So Brian knows that bottom right hand corner is about 200 to 300 pounds below the green area. So there's two, why is that? Is it drainage? Is it just underlying soil type? Whatever it is, there's then Brian's got this discussion and the challenge of saying, well, how can I manage that better? How can I improve the margins on that? Do I either chase yield? Do I try and reduce my costs on that area? And this comes into environmental, part of what ELMS are trying to do as well is, if we're consistently lower yielding on that point, as we seem to be, how can I manage that for both economic and environmental best practice? If we blanket rate applying stuff, we might have an inefficient use of nutrients, and that where it comes into other things of looking this data set as a not just a way of identifying marginal land.
Yeah, we looked at the example, taking that other bit of short work out, and yeah, it's another hectare taken out. In hindsight, we also then thought, well, actually, if the short work that we've taken out becomes too filled with weeds or become a problem in the stewardship options that we've chosen, then we've also got the ability to rotate them in the same field, keeping them within the area of the farm that we want them. So we didn't want to fill them both with options and then go, actually, we need to rotate them within that field parcel. And so that was a slight thing. We could have gone a bit further, taken another hectare out and get more options on there. But then for management, that having that sort of flexibility that we could flip the whole lot over, clean it up within the commercial cropping, give it a couple of years break, add a bit of fertilizer into it within the cropping sort of rotation, and then bring it back into to an option in a couple of years' time was sort of half the thinking. But to take another hectare out, you would then be sort of looking at reducing your area from, I think we were sort of 12% of our cropped area. If you then start creeping up to 15, 20, it starts to get quite hard to justify taking that huge amount of. But that's where this discussion is. Whereas marginal for me is different to marginal for Patrick, my cousin, who wants to do more for environmental. Nick, who's my operator, he always says that we've got too much good land taken out of production that he wouldn't class as marginal. So this is where it's that personal choice of where you draw the line. It gets quite yes, it's just a personal choice, but you've got to make most informed decisions, and this is what this is trying to do and show.
Good. I think we'll skip over this one, Teresa, because I think we've got it coming up later on, and it's best after we've talked about the next section of it.
Perfect. Thank you both. And it's interesting kind of questions and discussion and kind of building that up on the field level scale. Has anybody got any kind of comments or questions on that kind of as a field level? And then we're going to move on to have a look at how those clusters work across the landscape. But has anybody got any comments or questions on what you've heard so far I'd like to share? Whether in the chat or do.
No, it seems all quiet. Everyone's nodding away.
I'll come in, Teresa, and just kind of reiterate what Brian and David have kind of been saying about what is marginal. I often go on farms with my kind of watery eye and look at things and say that to me looks like it might be a marginal bit of field, but where this really shows is actually having that financial data behind it is really key to actually understanding, you know, what is you know, good for the business going forward. And I think that's the biggest thing I've taken out of this is taking that local knowledge and putting a sound financial, or as good as you can, financial basis behind it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Sam. I think it is really important, and it's going to become more and more important, isn't it, as we look kind of going forward to options available through yourselves or through stewardship or kind of, and private investment as well. So brilliant. Okay, thank you very much. So I think if we move on, David and Ryan, and talk through the kind of landscape scale and how this kind of individual approach, then how that fits across the landscape, and then we can have a discussion after that on a much wider kind of level on how we use this going forward. So yeah, over to you for the next bit. Thank you.
So obviously looked at a single field. Now we're going to just look at a selection of fields. We've got a group here that have followed a similar sort of rotation. We can look at them in two separate parts. We've got Crown, Triangle and Wiveston Road, and then Green Farm and Retters. So you can see the herbage grass has had to been taken out as it's not spatially mapped. There's the odd other one that's been taken out because it's had a trial in or there was data missing, such as the peas in 2014. And the winter wheat in 2013, but then also 2020, the spring barley and spring beans, the rotation differs, so makes it harder to compare. So we're just going to focus on the years where all the fields stay the same, or certainly Green Farm and Retters stay the same, and Crown and Triangle stay the same. So you can see there's the soil EC data there as well. So we're kind of picking up bits of variation going on across the fields anyway. So it's interesting to see how they will then match our clusters, but also match margins. So next, I suppose Brian, you know, just looking at that, there's plenty of short work. Identified Crown's got a little corner. You know, Triangles obviously all just short work. So those sorts of things you identify straight away, and it's then where we go and put these sort of steps to say, well, actually, if I was to take that out because it's short work, what would it be costing me?
Yeah, these fields, using this example, is slightly on our sort of periphery, on our perimeter. So we haven't concentrated that much emphasis onto these stewardship schemes because we wanted to get the core of our farm really buzzing and doing what we can control most for the environment on the main part of the farm. So these ones are slightly on the periphery, which also brings in another discussion about there's a roadside, we have hair coursing problems, we have gateways, we have there's a road goes along Wiveston Road between Wiveston Road Triangle. There's gateways off fields that people can access. There's been fly tipping incidents. So if you start having sort of options in the wrong locations, you can actually add a problem element as well. So this is more of a social sort of element that you have to consider when you're sort of taking land out of production. The soil type is quite interesting, like Retters and Wiveston Road, the blue bits, they do change considerably. And on top of Crown and Triangle, there's on top of the slight hill, there's a pond up the top there. So it is a different style. Green Farm's got I think it's got 8 poles, telegraph poles through it in 2 different telegraph runs. And so we've actually eliminated the top half, so that the red and the orange at the top of green farm, that's actually been put into a option within our higher tier to eliminate one run of telegraph poles, and then Nick, the spray operators, set our AB line off the set of telegraph poles at the bottom, so he has to do minimal going around telegraph poles in that field, because it used to be quite a pain with they don't go, they're not parallel like all things, that they don't fit in with our tram lines, so you'd have to then have a snaking session through the second lot if you've got the first one bob on. So we've used the options to try and streamline our farming operation. But yeah, they're different soil types. The majority, there's some light land and some heavy land. So it's interesting to see what the clustering flags up for these. But yeah, it's part of the farm that we haven't taken much land out of production for stewardship, because it's on our boundary and our periphery.
Good. Next slide, please, Teresa. So these are the clusters. So I've ordered these. So ones, so it's run on an individual field basis. So there's no sort of interaction at the moment. But the pink clusters are the high yielding clusters in each of those fields. And as Brian said, you can see the clear soil divide in Retters, and Crown's kind of following it, and Wiveston Road is a bit different to the EC scans. But there's other reasons for that. But we can then start to look at how an economic performance of each cluster and compare across time and fields. So in the previous example, obviously we looked at one field and saw it was about £400 cluster, or an average of £400 a hectare margin on that cluster. Now that's great, that's the way we're going to put it on that field. But in reality, if we're not going to put the whole every field into it, or every other field into it. So we want to identify the areas across fields that might be most suitable. So to do this, we have to look at across fields a basis. Next slide, please. So you forgive me, it's a bit of a headache, this one, but I've kind of you've got the two tables that are independent of each other, so we can compare Retters and green farm fields, and you can see there that actually when we compare to the previous example, we've got some lower areas of margin. So Retters and green farm, both those clusters 4 and 5, so the grey and the purple ones, on average are around about £376 a hectare net margin. You can see sort of some of that's coming from some bad years in 2015 and 16, and then there's some years where it does perform slightly better in 18 and 2012. But and then in the second group of fields, Triangle, Wiveston Road and Crown, we've got even more of a separated thing. You can see that Triangle field on its own has got some really low yielding clusters, or so low margin clusters, down to under £300 a hectare on average. Again, some minus years in there that is pulling that down reasonably quite considerably. And then some up in the top there. It's also got the highest yielding cluster, and that's probably partly down to the field and how it's situated in that corner towards the village, particularly poor. So we can then identify areas across those three fields that we might want to best suited to taking out of production. Ideally that corner in Triangle there with a much worse performance than the rest of its field compared to all the other fields. I don't know, Brian, if you want to add some comments to this and a bit of context to it.
So the worst bit of Triangle, it's a funny zigzag around a pond, which we've got a lot of scrub regrowth coming out, so we sort of going wider and wider. So you then don't get into the corners with different machines. So it's identified a pond that needs renovating under stewardship, under the capital works, which we've never got round to. So we would be looking at then in the future schemes renovating it, buffering it, squaring off that double zigzag, double corner, which we've just ended up just scooting around with the drills and the sprayer now. So we've streamlined it probably by sort of cutting corners, literally. So that's why we've done that. But also between Triangle and Crown, we've got an old historical lane which has got some big trees, lots of shading, lots of shadow. So that's what you've got there. On Retters, again, the worst performing bit of Retters. That is some really heavy, sticky land that when you walk over it in the winter, you bring half of the field with you. It's also full of black grass. So then we've been spot spraying sections out that in that sort of area, which is probably highlighted in the meal maps because we won't have the data for it. So That's another thing that where we've eliminated some of it, it may have not been picked up because the yield maps would have not gone round it. But we've had times where we've had to spray big proportions out. That's probably something that's just come to my mind that, David, you probably need to know about. That there have been times then we've taken the whole crop out and then we've cut round it where the bad black grass has been, that we've eliminated it in a standing crop. So that's another element that's probably skewed the data a little bit. But Rettus has a big divide between two fields, two soil types. It gets much more sort of easier going as it goes south. And then you've got the purple bit around the edge is some really light sort of gravelly land next to the main watercourse of the farm, which is probably why it burns off and doesn't perform as well. So yeah, so it's a very interesting sort of looking at the different clustering from my point of view, to show the level of differences in the net margin.
So I suppose the other, playing devil's advocate, is that actually even some of these low yielding clusters have good years and bad years. The question is, can I, to you looking at your previous, do you think you can eliminate those bad years in those areas, or are they always going to be there? Therefore, you can trust that mean margin, and that actually that's over the next 10 years, we probably are going to get those bad years on those areas. Therefore, it would make sense to take it out. Or, those negative figures in 2018, 2015, are they just an exception that you would expect not to happen over the next 10 years? And they're the sort of things you need to think about as well when looking at just the raw figure.
Yeah, I think it's some of it is we made mistakes in certain years. We had a crop of peas that got completely annihilated by pigeons and rooks. They shot 400 rooks in a day on it because they just descended on it, which then meant that when we harvested the peas, the seed producer who wanted the peas phoned me up and said, "Do you want your 8 ton of topsoil back that you put in your lorry, which we've cleaned out your peas?" So we've made mistakes, which is farming. We've learned from it. There are things that we're trying to improve. The worst blackgrass land in Rettus we have sort of taken out several years on the trot, and we've now got it down to a manageable level. So there are things that we are improving and trying to work, and we're getting much more keyed up on sort of using technology, variable seed rates, to sort of get a better establishment going forward. And this is something that we're sort of trying to get better and better with, to try and even out some of these off the establishment variations, which then have the legacy effect through the whole season. So technology can change it, but the underlying factor is that the soil changes can create sort of big disparities in the net return, and that's where we got to know when to switch the tap of inputs off and when not to. And this is where the other work that we're doing within the strategic farm, the high and low investment, sort of makes a difference. That should we keep continuing to farm them, but not farm the whole field, but to understand which ones in the good years you can really push and maintain your high output, but where do you then rein it back a little bit? And in which scenarios should you be reining it back? Should we be reconsidering only doing some spring crops like spring barley, and where peas and beans don't prefer that land in normally in some Latin situations, should we be more flexible in going for the right crops in the right scenarios? And that's where the bigger discussion becomes a little bit deeper and more sort of with the data you've got now in front of us, you can start sort of understanding what we should be trying to replicate in future years.
And then another aspect again is the environmental consideration. We looked at what stacks up financially to be taken out of production. Now, what would stack up environmentally in Sam's work and what they would like to see happen? Taking areas of the farm that are going to pose the biggest environmental risk. They're the places we can either farm a bit more cautiously or put into schemes. So this is just an example from the erosion risk mapping that Sam has access to, and a function of sort of elevation and topographic wetness. But you can see sort of, Brian, I'm not sure how is that water course between Wiveston Road and Green Farm. Is it just a ditch or a little bit of a stream?
Yeah, it's that's one of the main tributaries into what we class as our main watercourse, which runs along the north side of Rettus. I wouldn't say that we've seen much surface runoff across the farm. The only places that we used to see it was down tram lines, and that's why then we've gone to planting our tram lines with seed just to slow the runoff off. And we've seen them much reduced with having green tram lines through the season. It has helped that, but certain scenarios we're not very steep sloped. The map there does show where we would class sort of sloping land, but I'm sure Sam would probably beg to differ when he sent me pictures of sediment building up in the bottom corners of certain fields. We do have problems, and we are looking at sediment traps. We're looking at how we can sort of manage our water quality through different options, looking at woody dams, looking at how we can sort of farm in a more sympathetic way for our soil water quality. And so this is something that we've really got to look at. And this is where next round of higher tier, and also looking at what private money is available. Sam's got in our area there's money from different organisations like Coca-Cola and British Sugar and things like that. So there's money available to help the water quality on the bigger landscapes, depending on what catchment you are in. So that we will be looking at that in future years when we've identified the high risk bits. And I know there's certain fields on the farm that we will definitely have to do something with, because their soil type is much more prevalent to runoff than what we are looking at the moment.
I think, Brian, you attested to it, but sort of that corner of triangle is flagging up as both low margin, low yield, and also high environmental risk. So, you know, it's a win-win for everyone when the pond and whatever you said. But yeah, they're the sort of areas where, you know, both we could potentially make economic savings, but also the largest environmental ones. Yeah,
Triangles field is a difficult one, because when you look at it, it does produce a cracking field of wheat, but it's a triangle, and this is where we had that debate in the last one where someone was talking about auto section control. Well, when you look at a triangle without auto section control, you're very dependent on how quickly you can switch on, switch off, and sometimes you overdose, sometimes you underdose, and so that is and I've always said that the worst thing a farmer can farm is a triangle. But now with auto section, Nick, my spray operator, always says, oh, well, there's land that triangle does actually switch on so much more quickly and more accurately that is now less marginal than what you probably think it is. And triangles, the prime example, saying I think it's about 3.4 hectares in total, but you wouldn't want to take that whole out, because in the really good years that produces some of the best wheat on the farm. But then on the flip side, there are parts of it you would then start questioning it on an efficiency of farming side of it, with overlaps and things like that. So it's a really emotional sort of thing. And would I want to have that whole field in stewardship going forward? What is the efficient field size that you should be looking at? Should we be looking at any field under 3 hectares? Does that become, with the size of gear when you're trying to get on, does small fields slow you up? And so this is another sort of question you have to ask yourself in marginal land, and where we're going long term. Should we be looking at smaller areas in more option based or better options environmentally than just having a good crop of wheat every 1 year in 4 or 5?
Brian, Mike's asked, I'll comment on it as well, but I'll let you go first. Would you consider changing input levels on those areas of the field that are always higher yielding or lower yielding, but still being cropped? Or would that add too much complexity or be of no benefit? I think it's tough to say sometimes, but
it's difficult to say, because we vary our inputs due from the sort of work that I do with sort of plant counts and biomass calculations and NDVI scanning, that you can start picking out which fields are better and which ones aren't. And so then we do a tiered investment depending on a field against another field, whereas to vary inputs within field starts to get a lot more complicated. And certainly the work that we've done this year and last year with the lower and higher input within the field, the double running of the sprayer into field, if you've got 1 tank mix for the good bit and 1 tank mix for the second bit, that's where you start wasting a lot of time on the road, a lot of mixing time, a lot of complicated increase of sort of paperwork, and to make sure it's going in the right places and communicating that to the operators. So I would say you could start doing it, but it's looking at potentially changing rotations. Should you be cropping it? Should you be putting the worst bits in the spring into a cover crop to build up organic matter, and then just farming the best bit that you know that's going to be good for the spring crop, and then trying to build up organic matter? Can you put some long-term herbal lays for a new enterprise like sheep or cattle to build up some fertility? There's different ways to look at it, but again, it comes back to the old elephant in the room, which is your fixed costs. You've invested it over your whole farm area. If you start taking big chunks out, that skews your fixed costs to negative effect. So that's where the costing element becomes quite interesting.
Great, thank you. I just wonder if we finish the presentation, then we can have a discussion. You've raised all sorts of questions there, and I know Tom Dewars, you've got a question or a point that you'd like to raise. So maybe we just, I know, have you got one more slide there to cover, David, and then we can open it up for questions.
Yeah, I think it's just for comparison. There's the Omnia thing, which is interesting from the inconsistently good in that corner and consistently poor, but it sort of smooths out some of those that we've seen in the clustering, particularly in Wiverston Road. Is it the big field on the left?
Yeah. Yes, when I was building the Omnia map, we were just using winter wheat as the example, so that's where it doesn't. So that's where it sort of picks out. So it's just winter wheat in those potential things, and that's very, very difficult to, because where one is inconsistent compared to another field's inconsistency is completely different. That's where the clustering is sort of a more accurate way of doing it.
Great, thank you so much, both of you. I'm sure there's lots of questions out there, kind of what you've heard, and you've both raised all sorts of different kind of points of areas to consider of how we can use the clusters. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat box or raise your hand using the little kind of symbol with the hand, and I'll come to you for questions. We've got some time for questions and discussion of what we've heard. So Tom Dewars, do you want to make your comment first?
Yeah, I'd written down as we were going through, and Brian and David both touched on one of them just there with variation of inputs, and it struck me that you've done a wonderful job there with the yield data, and then but what we've done when we put it onto a margin, I'm presuming, was you'd got an average margin across the field, but in reality, I mean, I know I have, for a start, we've done variable rate seed across the field, and a lot of the areas that we'd identified in the past as perhaps being lower yielding, if we hadn't put them into stewardship, we'd discuss with the agronomist, right, how are we going to improve the yield on there? For a start, we'll put more seed on. So that part of the field has actually had a higher cost. And then different areas of the field, we'd put more fertilizer on and some less. So the actual margin map is different, because some of the higher yielding areas might have had more fertilizer or might have had less fertilizer. I don't know. So it's almost I know sometimes technology may make it even more confusing, but some of my maps, for instance, some of those inconsistently poor areas that were sort of on the edge of being marginal or not, if you add in the fact that you've spent maybe another £20 a hectare putting more seed on it, for instance, or maybe slapping some extra N on to try to get it to tiller more and then not got the yield response, then the net margin is actually worse than it is on average, because you've spent more on that part of the field. And the other point I just wanted to make was we've got to be very careful with certain crops, because you can compare certain on-field performance. You can compare across different crops if you set the margin for each field at the appropriate level. But when we started yield mapping, we found that we hadn't been growing oilseed rape very long, actually, because we used to grow vining peas, and we noticed after the first couple of years that oilseed rape maps for the same field or cereal map and oilseed rape always seem to be nearly opposite. The good bits in wheat were the bad bits in rape, and we then went out after the oilseed rape and count the stalks in each area of the good and the bad areas of the field, and we were finding that we were drilling all our rape at 100 seeds a square metre, and we're actually finding that where we've got 20 stalks a square metre, we've got all the yield, and where we've got 50, 75, 100 stalks a square metre, we've got very poor yield. And so basically our establishment maps were the opposite way round. So we had to adjust our seed rate for oilseed rape quite drastically to make the most of oilseed rape. But my point really is you get better response from putting more seed on the bad areas in wheat, but if you're not very careful, it's the opposite effect with rape. And then if you're plumbing that all into the yield performance map, you get this inconsistent area because you've got the wrong data in. Yeah. So it's not as simple as just pressing a button. You've got to take into account so many variables.
Yeah, we haven't really done. The last couple of autumns, variable rate seeding's gone out the window because we've then gone, it's just gone wet and horrible, and we just must get it in, and so it's all gone. All best plans sort of get ripped up and blown out the window with 2 wet autumns on the trot. Fertilizer wise, we sort of pretty much haven't done any variable rate fertilizer for 10 years. We used to do different P's and K's around the farm, but never saw a response. Just found it was a very expensive way of increasing your costs of fertilizer. And when you look at what's available in the soil, we were trying to get the most out of what we've got in there. And same with lime, we haven't done any lime. Our soil is naturally calcium, and so the buffer pH sort of bobs around where we want it to be. So we've never had sort of any hot spots that needed any lime, and we sort of very cynical about that when we sort of looked into the sort of soil science of it. So I'd say for the data set that Dave is looking at, it's fairly field by field. There's going to be little bits which probably get a little bit more, but for the yeah, I totally understand where we're looking at when you're looking at it to be definitive of where it's got to be. But then how do you sort of layer that into all the other stuff? It gets very, very difficult to quantify it all.
I know, David, you have, with Brian growing herbage grass, there are some of those, it was easier to take those out when you're looking at it because they do kind of make the data a bit cloudy. I don't know if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, I suppose making the data cloudy would be generous on herbage grass, I think, Tracy. Yeah, a lot of it was just nonsense, wasn't it, Brian? There's the odd one where, it was dry and it got in it all combined in the same day, but even then the moisture, the moisture on the combines is normally pretty good. So for wheat, all yields have been adjusted to 15%. Now on grass, where you're combining at 30%, Brian, sort of that sort of level.
Yeah, you start 35 in the morning and then it gets to about 20, and then by 7 o'clock at night you're back to about 50. So it's and then with a stripper header, with a smaller header size, different runs, it all becomes very, very complicated. And then it's not all perfect clean seed going in the tank, so you've then got to sift out pretty much 10 to 15% of that weight, depending on if it was in the morning or the afternoon, because you're stripping more off in the dry than you are in the wet. So it is very complicated.
And it's a limitation of all these spatial analysis, is that if you've got that missing data, it's a bit of an unknown, which you can then sort of fill in by, Brian knows we've got that data, which will be published in the full report, like the actual margin across the field for that year, and therefore if it was a really high grass margin in that year, then actually that probably should be taken into account because it's not yielding nothing. But it's a complex thing that's hard to get to grips with in this sort of data. It's something that needs to be acknowledged when you're doing it, is to look at those crops and say, well, how is that performing in each of this there? Now we've got these clusters. Brian might want to do just a simple 100 meters or 50 meters over the weight, in his weigh cell on the trailers, just to verify what's coming off in grass or sugar beet, whatever it may be, just to sort of at least give some validation in those crops that aren't spatially mapped that the patterns are the same. I think there's someone else with a hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we'll have the last question. I'm just thinking, Nick, and when you come to, for example, we were talking earlier, weren't we, when you come to kind of do these things, it's the importance of your notes, Brian, that you had, and kind of keeping it going forward, and having that kind of questioning mind that you have, Tom, too, as of actually, why is this telling me what it's telling me, and that the opposite is a lot we need to do for the data. You can't take it just as read. So, Mike, would you like to ask your question, and then we'll wrap up?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to know from David and you guys at AHDB, what are the plans for this in the future? Obviously, David's done some fantastic work here in helping analyse Brian's farm, but is there any plans to roll this out, develop this into a tool that could be used by more farmers, or just wondering where you might go with it?
David, do you want to go first, and then I can add my thoughts?
Yeah, so well, I start obviously with doing the work with AHDB. It's been taken a lot further because I'm including it as part of my PhD and looking at well, we're looking at not just this marginal land, we're looking at how we can better manage those clusters. We've touched on it briefly recently, but sort of just, you know, actually doing some proper nutrient modeling across those clusters, how the crop's taking nutrients up and how we could possibly better manage that, both for the environment and economically. So that will be going on with Cranfield over the next 2 or 3 years. But in terms of, you know, at the moment I've wrote the code so it can be, I can reasonably easily apply it to other farms. You know, in terms of a tool, that would take a bit more of a development, which isn't included in this project. But I don't know what Teresa and their plans are.
And feel free to chip in here, Brian. But I think for us, it's the concept of thinking about what's marginal and what's productive, and some of what David's done is kind of taken this to the next level. But it's to create a methodology and a pattern, and as we said earlier, like a bit of a checklist. If you've got this data and you're in Nick's position, for example, you know, what are the things to think about the data and the levels of it, and what other kind of farms and businesses can learn from it, and whichever system you're using, what you can kind of do. I think the level of data that David's gone into, you know, we can talk to other kind of organisations and companies and see what we can do going forwards. But I think for me, for kind of the strategic farm from AHDB's role, it's sharing the principles that if farmers are thinking about going into ELMS going forwards, and you know there's X level of data available on farm, you know, what would be good to have, what would be good to start collecting now, whether that's yields or costs or margins, so that when it comes into it, that can be you know, done from a business mindset, you know, as much as an environmental mindset as well. So I don't know if you want to add to that, Brian, how you see it, but
yeah, this was one of the pieces of work that sort of I felt was really relevant given the way the industry is going, because farmers are going to be asked to take land out of production to basically tick the boxes of all the environmental questions that we're being sort of pushed into our sort of letterbox at the moment from the government. So we know that we've got to farm our farm maintaining production, but at the same time we've got to increase water protection, we've got to increase air quality, we've got to increase soil and soil health. And so farmers have got to make a real sort of take the blinkers off of trying to crop the whole farm. And I drive around the countryside and locally, and I see parts of neighbours' fields that always don't perform to their potential as the rest of the field does. And I'm just like, have they ever considered putting them into a stewardship, and or have they? What's going on in that field? And I've always said to when we drive around the country, we'd love to have a stake in every single field, telling me what variety it was, what the seed rate was, what the fertilizer was, and what their past management was, because you start getting that feel of what other farmers are making decisions on the fly with. And this, hopefully, going through this process about what David's doing with my data is hopefully going to sort of be sort of the guinea pig so that is opening my sort of farm filing cabinet to the decisions that we've gone to, why we've taken land out of production. I know that in the future, some parts of my fields, some parts of my farm total fields will be out into a different rotation. They'll either be in stewardship, they'll be looking at water quality, they'll be looking environmentally. There'll be hopefully different enterprises when you start looking at, can we integrate livestock back onto the farm? Do we need to have a proportion that would then be in long-term herbal lays? Do we need to have forage crops to offset that? So this is where we've got to identify, and hopefully we'll sort of watch these webinars back and keep up with the discussion, and obviously David's PhD, which he's doing this farm, and Morley's to compare against different soil types. Will they be able to then say, well, actually, yeah, we need to know the costs how can we get those costs? How do we look at it? How can we use the technology of Omnia to soil? How can we look at the free layers of data, sort of Google Earth and NDVI mapping? How can we actually take this to the next level? Because we're going to be asked, when these subsidies reduce, that comfort blanket of making a profit year on year is going to get eroded, and so we've got to work out, why do we actually farm every part of our field from the historical meter by meter squared to get our BPS payment? Now we've got to be very quick, why do we farm it, and we've got to be making a profit out of it, and can you reduce the risk and your fixed costs, and you'll make your whole farming business much more streamlined and more profitable by having a much more open can approach of there are other options out there than just cropping in a commercial cereal world like we have in our farm.
Lovely, thank you, Brian. Great, thank you everybody for your questions and input and into the discussion. So I think we'll just wrap up there. Just to say that all of the information about what's going on in terms of this trial and the other trials are all available on the Strategic Farm East website, and there are links there to the other strategic farms, our one in the West, Scotland, and our new one in the South on that on the websites as well, and you can have a look at what's going on across there and keep up to date. Just a few key other links that you might be interested in as we come up to harvest. Our harvest toolkit with all of the resources you might need for harvest there. A BPS calculator to look at what the changes are for BPS going forwards. Not an easy one to look at, but really, really important, and links in very much what we've been talking about this morning. So it's all available on our website. As we said, we're just coming to the end of our Strategic Farm Summer now. This is the last event that we've had, but all of that information is available on our website. You can watch back from previous research updates about what's going on each of the farms, and our other workshops around plant health analysis and the flowering strips. There are other events going on around the country if you're interested in what's going on with you locally. Our recommended list, trial sites are open, and our Monitor Farm meetings, webinars and other work going on as well. So all of that's available if you go onto our events page of the website, and you can register either to attend in person or online. So just to say a final thank you, very much thank you to David and Brian for pulling all of the information together. I think it is a platform for discussion and to look at what the information we've got now, how we can make the most of interpreting and analysing that and using that going forward. So thank you to you both, and we look forward to seeing what the next stage is in November at the results meetings there. Thank you to all of our facilitators today, to our steering group, and to you all for taking part. The session has been recorded if you wanted to watch it back, and if you've got any questions or any further information you'd like, please feel free to get in touch. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Friday, and have a think about that marginal land as you get on that combine. Try and get that yield mapping working for you this year. Brilliant. Thank you. Have a good rest of your day. Cheers.